Before doing anything to these variable speed drives, the first thing we have to do is get the motor off. Yes, the first step is the hardest. So we're going to begin doing that by turning it on and running the speed all the way down to the lowest speed. That separates these pulley sheaves under the motor the maximum amount. Okay, I've already taken off the access plate under here. If you look up in here, you'll find two holes where you can put clamping screws to clamp that spring and those pulley sheaves open. I'll show you that better once we go down there. You can normally use the screws, the same screws that we're holding this access plate on. Normally. So screw them in there. And tighten them down. Next thing we want to do is unplug it. And we're going to remove the motor switch. If it's mounted on the side of the casing, which most of them are. And that's normally these two bolts here. Just frees the motor up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the entire speed control from the front of the machine. I'm going to do that so I can push the belt farther out of the pulley. That makes it easier to get that motor off. That's these 4 bolts here. Once that's loose for now, you can just let it hang from the chain, the speed control chain. What we want to do is take something and push the belt into the pulley sheaves. All the way down, as far as we can. Now it's time to remove the 2 bolts that hold the motor on. A bit of a challenge to get out of there, especially. Okay, I've removed the 2 bolts that secure the motor. I've also put a small wooden wedge in the front to try and keep that belt as far back as possible. Here in the shop, we also have a clamp that fits around the motor. It makes it a little bit easier to deal with it. Of course, we also have an overhead crane. If you want the plans for this, you can visit the website. But if you don't have a crane or a bracket, then you're just going to have to wrestle this motor off of here and get it disentangled from the belts. This one's also a little bit easier because it's mounted to our table as just a head that we're rebuilding for a customer instead of sitting way on top of the mill frame. So we're going to take the motor out. No doubt you've seen all kinds of optimistic instructions on how to do this and where to tilt it and all that. It's still a pain. The easiest way to do it, if you have lift it until the top sheave of the pulley is a little bit over the top of the motor thing, and then you can move the motor forward and hopefully push the belt down around the pulley. Now it's a tight fit. Again, anything you can do, make sure that these pulley bolts are tightened as far as you can to get it as far apart, and try and get the belt into the front pulley as far as you can, and sort of hold it in there if you can. And there's just enough room to get it off. set up a little bit better, I hope, with the 2 bolts that are holding this pulley sheet, which is normally spring-loaded with this spring, all the way down, giving us the most room. It's a little bit of a pain, and if you've got to do it manually, standing on top of the mill, well, you might have to make a few shots at it. Anyhow, that's actually the hardest part of rebuilding or working on one of these, is getting the motor out. You can visit the website. There's a few better pictures and diagrams showing you what to do there. We're going to take our wedge out, and we can proceed to disassemble this. We're going to start by taking the top bearing cap off. And that's these 3 bolts here. Now if you look on the bearing cap, you'll see there's 3 other threaded holes in there. Those are where you can reinsert these screws and use them as jack screws to jack this bearing cap off. It's actually pressed onto the top bearing. So we'll take these out and put them in these 3 holes. Often these things are dredged up with dirt and everything else. You might have to run a tap through it to get the bolt to fit. These aren't too bad. Put them in the threaded holes and just alternating between them. You can go ahead and jack this bearing cap right off of here. At least get a good start on it. Make sure you go a little bit on each bolt so you don't get it crooked. Because that would be terrible. Once you've done that, take the bearing cap. Now there's a weight washer in there. Very important. It keeps pressure on the top bearing. And a really, really bad top bearing. Now we want to go inside, and there are 2 bolts with sleeves on them that hold the adjusting plate to the top pulley. So we're going to go in there and remove those. Okay, we've removed the motor, removed our wedge and everything. We've taken the top bearing cap off and put it aside, and we've removed the screws that hold the speed adjusting plate to the top pulley inside. And those are small screws that go through the plate with a bushing on them. Occasionally you'll find one like this one that only has 1. Now the top of this thing is held on by 5 cap screws. 2 here, 2 back here, and 1 in the center of the back. So we're going to take those out. There. Fairly low. And do not forget the one in the back, which goes up from the bottom. You should now be able to pull the top off this. It's still held on by a couple of dowel pins. Free those dowels. And this whole assembly, notice with the speed control, will come off. Now this is normally the stage at which you can replace the drive belt. You can see some of the setup here and why it's necessary to get that drive belt far back in that pulley as you can in order to get the motor off, so it clears the motor pulleys. This is the drive belt. Actually, this collar here is what pulls this up and down and adjusts the speed. And it rides on a couple of bushings in there, but we'll get to that. All right, we've made it this far. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the next layer off, which is this here, because we're rebuilding the entire machine. That's also necessary if you have to replace the timing belt, which is right back here. So this is as far as you would go to replace the drive belt, and then put it all back together. Like I said, we're going to rebuild the entire machine, so we're going to go farther and remove this layer next. And that layer is held on by 4 more cap screws, 2 up in front and 2 in the rear. And there's nothing to disconnect or remove, to just take those screws out and we'll take this plate off. Okay, you have 4 screws. I've already broken them loose. I want to point out right here the two dowel pins that locate the top cover on it, and these dowel pins are incredibly important to keep everything aligned. And this bottom also has 2 dowel pins. Once those 4 screws are out, again, a little bit of priority. Make sure you drop a few things on the floor. Now this plate, we have another belt challenge. It has the back gear, or the timing belt. And at the same time you remove this, you've got to disengage that belt. Sometimes this one's fairly loose. Sometimes I'll lay it off. A pry bar, screwdriver, or whatever often helps. Okay. Once we do that, that's the next step. We'll just pile it up here for now. We're going to go through individual pieces. This is the timing belt. This is normally the stage you would be at to replace the timing belt. The timing belt and the back gear pulley. Of course, the back gear is underneath here. This is the spindle shaft coming up through the back gear. And I see all kinds of problems with this guy, but anyhow, that's the next stage. And we will show you how to put it back together properly. Point out a couple of things real quick on this. Of course, this is the drive pulley. The main drive belt drives. It moves up and down, adjusted by the speed control, which is the variable speed part of the pulley arrangement. This, on the other half, this pulley drives the rest of this shaft. The timing belt, which drives the back gear, goes around up here. And right down here are the top dogs to the direct drive clutch, which we'll see the other half in a minute. And that's always spinning. You can see just a little bit of the brake mechanism there. The brake is actually underneath. You can see the brake shoe there moving. It's actually underneath this pulley. Coming over to what that sits on, if we can get a picture of it. This is the other half of the direct drive clutch. That's operated by the gear change lever here. When it's up, it's in direct drive. This mates with the gear, with the clutch teeth on this part. And of course, if you put it in low gear, that moves that down, which then engages the back gear. You can see it turning there, and disengages the direct drive clutch dogs. This here is the spindle shaft that goes through the back gear, and the splines here are driven by the back gear. The back gear is underneath these dogs. So just a quick guided tour of how this thing operates. It's not rocket science. Now, let's smoothly move our camera back, and we're going to continue on with the major sub-assemblies. We're going to take off the back gear assembly, which is the last of the sub-assemblies, if you will. And that's these 3 11/16 bolts down here. So we're going to remove those. And these are the bolts. There's 3 of them right here, 1 there, and 1 in the back. And these are the bolts that, of course, they tell you don't ever loosen. It's a factory adjustment. But to work on it, you have to. And we'll eventually show you how to make that factory adjustment. It's not that bad. These actually, this moves around, and I do want to point out between this back gear housing and the intermediate housing, there's 2 more dowel pins that align those 2 together. And again, those dowel pins are extremely important to keep everything lined up. So we'll go ahead and remove these 3 bolts here. Of course, they won't spin off by hand. And there's nothing else required to disconnect this. It'll just lift right off of there. I'm going to move the quill down all the way just to get the spindle shaft just out of our way. Once the 3 bolts are off, this entire piece will, a little bit of persuasion. Okay, a lot of persuasion. The reason I'm having troubles is I'll show you here. The top of the spindle shaft has been gouged out pretty bad by not tightening the drawbar well enough. That's probably going to have to be replaced. That's going to be an expensive piece, but it's pretty well mangled, and having trouble sliding it off of these. Okay, what I've been doing for the last few minutes is using a file to clean up this spline so I can slide the back gear and the entire assembly off of it. This is absolutely not normal. It should slide right off of there. We're going to see how we did. I'm going to put the quill all the way down and make this a little bit easier. And then we're going to try and get this off of there again. All right. That is really there we go. Now, what caused that is basically the drawbar not being tight enough and allowing it to spin on top of there. You can see from this shaft And there's what a normal shaft looks like. I don't know if you can see that. It's got a good 3/16 of an inch gouged out. It's either the wrong collets, worn out collets, or just not tightening the drawbar enough. In this case, here's the drawbar out of it. You can see first of all where it's been wearing, but also they've got the wrong collar on there. They've got two collars, and both of them have this little lip on there. So it would have made it very hard to actually tighten down the drawbar and get the collet tight enough. It's unusual. Normally the collets pretty much stick in the taper well. You just have to snug down on the drawbar, but apparently they haven't been doing this. Anyhow, this is the spindle shaft itself, so if we can't clean this up by machining it, it might end up being a very expensive repair for them. Excuse me. Now, over here, the piece we took off, point out a couple of things from here. Again, you can see, hello. Point out a couple of things on here. You can see, first of all, this is the worm that feeds the quill, drives the quill feed. You can see that. You can see this entire assembly, which is the back gear and the collar assembly, moving up and down. The quill and spindle shaft, or the spindle shaft, normally fits right through there, and there's splines in the back gear itself. So anyhow, normally that's all you have to do to take that off is take those 3 bolts out, those 3 nuts off, and lift it right off of there. And that's all 3 major assemblies for the drive. We've now got the major assemblies disassembled. Now we'll pick each one individually and go through that and see what we need to do. But that's another video. So